As for our meeting guidelines this evening, by participating in this meeting, you understand that this meeting is being recorded and you may be muted for background noise. During the question and answer sessions, we'll focus on answering questions related to this evening's presentations. As always, we'll do our best to listen and address all comments and questions so that everyone has the opportunity to participate. Additionally, we ask that you limit your comments or questions to allow for others who may not have had a chance to participate yet. Like so many of you, we are also just learning this new Zoom platform, so we thank you for your patience and understanding as we navigate this new remote collaborative space together. Slide 5, please. For tonight's meeting, the participant agenda and participation slides are available in English and Spanish at dtsc.ca.gov/public forums, PUBLIC FORUMS. For your convenience, we'll also post this web address in our chat box. For members of the media, please contact Elizabeth Scott in the DTSC Office of Communications at elizabeth.scott@dtsc.ca.gov. That is again, Elizabeth, ELIZABETH.SCOTT@dtsc.ca.gov. Slide 6, please. Our commitment and pledge is aligned with our organizational mission. The mission of DTSC is to protect California's people and the environment from harmful effects of toxic substances by restoring contaminated resources, enforcing hazardous waste laws, reducing hazardous waste generation, and encouraging the manufacture of chemically safer products. Our mission serves as our compass. Before we move on, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the challenging and difficult circumstances that so many are experiencing in our communities and in our neighborhoods and within our own families as we continue to navigate these unprecedented times. The pandemic has impacted so many. Our hope is for you and your families to stay safe and to be well as we emerge into this new year. Again, we thank you sincerely for your continued involvement this evening and throughout the year ahead. Now, since we last held this forum in 2019, DTSC has assembled a team of dedicated public servants who serve on our executive leadership team and who are represented on our panel this evening. At this time, we'd like to introduce our new executive team members, starting with our director of DTSC, Dr. Meredith Williams. Dr. Meredith?
Thank you, Patrice. I want to welcome everyone to attending the meeting this year. As Patrice highlighted, it's been a difficult year, and we, like many of you, were very happy to turn the calendar to a new year. Californians faced a tremendous challenges throughout the last year, both with COVID and with racial reckoning, among other things. And these issues hit us, and I'm sure hit you personally, as our families responded to and adjusted to COVID and suffered the effects of COVID and lost loved ones. We adjusted, the issues hit us in our work environments, both and our livelihoods. And we obviously saw the impacts societally. So it was quite an impactful year, and nevertheless, there are things to build on. And I know that all of you know this from your own experience. So some of the things we'll talk about today are how we at DTSC adjusted to the challenges of the last year and continued to work to fulfill our mission in spite of it all. And in this new year, we are looking ahead, and tonight we'll take a moment to look ahead. We have a lot on our plate, and we want to share that with you so that you can not just be aware of what we're working on, but so that you can participate in our work. At this time, our offices are open. We continue to do our job. We continue to work to protect you and your loved ones from toxic harm. And we do truly appreciate all of you taking the time to, at the end of a long work day, perhaps, to meet with us, to hear what we have to say, and to provide information to us to help us do the work that we need to do. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Patrice, for further.
Thank you, Dr. Meredith. We'd like to introduce our Chief Deputy Director, Ms. Francesca Negri.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for being here today. I know that your time is really precious and that you have high demands on your time, and I really appreciate your interest in DTSC and for for being here this evening and for contributing to this dialogue about DTSC and our programs and services. I'm going to share with you our DTSC, pardon me. I'm going to share with you our DTSC strategic plan update. So next slide, please.
Actually, first, Francesca, I'll go over the agenda.
Oh, that's fine. I apologize.
I'll welcome you in just
I
a
will
minute.
wait to go over the plan until I'm cued to do so. But I did want to thank everybody for being here tonight and for tuning in, especially in your busy lives and your busy evenings, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Francesca. Anna, would you please say hello?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Ana Mascareñas, Deputy Director and Tribal Liaison, the Office of Environmental Equity, Environmental Justice, Public Participation, and Tribal Affairs Programs. And we also, I'll ask to hand it over just for the brief kind of introduction as well to Rizgar, and then Grant, and then Carl. And then Ali, we can go through the agenda. Just want to make sure everybody knows that we are on as panelists and here to share information and listen to you this evening. Thank you for being here. Rizgar, you're next.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rizgar Ghazi. I'm the the Deputy Director for the Hazardous Waste Management Program. Welcome. Grant.
Hey, good evening. My name is Grant Cope. I am the Deputy Director over the Cleanup Program.
Thank you all so much. It's been an honor to share this journey with each of you. With that, I'd like to invite to the table our Deputy Director of Communications, and again, my co-facilitator, Ali Westcott, to share tonight's agenda and to introduce our first presentation. Ali?
Thank you, Patrice, for your warm welcome and for your beautiful and timely comments this evening. Tonight, we will share an update on DTSC's 2020-24 strategic plan and how our programs have continued to meet their mission during the pandemic. We'll open it up for questions and answers before coming back to the table to discuss DTSC's workload analysis and budget proposals. We'll invite questions and comments once more before closing for the evening. Tonight's agenda reflects DTSC's commitment to transparency, community engagement, and as always, our critical mission to protect Californians and the environment from toxic harm. We look forward to presenting these updates to you this evening and to hearing your comments and answering your questions, not only tonight, but on an ongoing basis. Before the end of the meeting, we will share key contact information so you can continue to engage with us. Next slide, please. I'd like to proudly introduce DTSC's Chief Deputy Director, Francesca Negri.
Okay, after that false start, I'll get started again. Thank you again, everybody. So I'd like to take just a few moments to talk about DTSC's strategic plan with you. When Director Williams was appointed in 2019, we began working on a roadmap for DTSC's success. And the plan, which includes public comment, and many of you may have submitted input, is based on a vision where we're all working toward that allows all of California to thrive in a healthy environment. We're working toward that vision through the mission that Patrice shared with you, which is to protect California's people, communities, and environment from toxic substances, to enhance economic vitality by restoring contaminated land, and to compel manufacturers to make safer products. Through the hard work and commitment of our staff and contributions from our engaged stakeholders, including many of you, we've created this 5-year roadmap that emphasizes measurable outcomes. Next slide, please. Our 5-year roadmap focuses on 5 key goals. The first is to build strong partnerships so that we are collaborating with our stakeholders. We want to promote environmental justice to prevent harm and protect the most vulnerable. We're committed to delivering high-performing programs and services effectively and on time. We're enhancing our organizational health so that we are more inclusive, productive, and accountable. And we're improving our fiscal stewardship through greater transparency, fortified by secure and reliable funding. The importance of this roadmap became really clear during 2020, and we used it to remain focused despite all of the personal and professional challenges you have faced and we have faced with the impact of COVID-19. Next slide, please. In addition to 5 core goals, the plan includes medium-term objectives that take 2 to 3 years to achieve. It also includes shorter-term actions, which are projects that take anywhere from 6 months to a couple of years. We prioritize these, and then we take stock annually on how those projects contributed toward achievement of the objectives and goals that we set for ourselves. We're measuring progress that these short-term actions have against our goals through what's called key performance indicators. And we're looking forward to posting on our external website in early 2021 a dashboard so that you can follow along with our progress and hold us accountable. Next slide, please. So a report card of our activities in for 2021 is included on this slide. The plan is a cross-functional plan, and what that means is it's a department-wide effort to achieve our goals. And many of these prioritized actions that I've been referring to is work that the employees are doing in addition to their regular core program work. The goal teams are comprised of staff located throughout all of DTSC's regional office and at varying levels. In fact, approximately 125 staff are engaged at any time, from executive to managers and staff level, on projects related to the strategic plan. There are 108 prioritized actions that are outlined in the plan throughout the 2020-2024 time frame for this plan. The plan is supposed to be a living and breathing document, however, so the number of projects can change over time. We may add projects or replace them with ones that are more suited to the current environmental conditions in which we're working. And that means we will continue to be receiving feedback from our stakeholders on what is most important for us to deliver. So 25% of the actions, our prioritized actions that we originally identified, have been completed. We were able to complete 27 in year 2020. We're on track to meet our commitments with this plan. Examples of our 2020 accomplishments include the adoption of a tribal consultation policy that outlines principles, values, and guidance for interactions with tribes. We're being more proactive with communicating clear requirements and expectations for businesses seeking a permit or a permit renewal. We've implemented a violation scoring procedure to evaluate violations and assess compliance history for permitted hazardous waste facilities. We've implemented improvements in our Safer Consumer Products program, in implementing tools to improve efficiency, to minimize delay, and enhance communication. We've improved our internal communication channels to enhance employee engagement with consistent and timely information. And finally, we've developed a workload analysis, which we're going to refer to and discuss later on, to better communicate to you how we're using our resources and the steps that we've taken to be better stewards of those resources. Next slide, please. The strategic plan not only gives us a roadmap for continued internal improvements for DTSC, it provides a way for you and stakeholders to measure our performance and hold us accountable. It's a dynamic plan. It will allow us to respond to changing circumstances and to improve it based on lessons learned as we implement projects and prioritized actions. It positions us for long-term success and provides opportunity for continued conversations around our vision. Moving forward, success will be measured by these key performance indicators I indicated earlier, and that you'll be able to track on our external website. The plan is more than just a statement of values. It's our promise to be a reliable and trustworthy steward of California's environment and resources. We're committed to this plan and we're prepared to be held accountable. I want to thank all of you who thoughtfully commented on the plan and shaped it. And I invite you to continue to engage in conversations with us about what you'd like to see us do, how you'd like to see us improve, and other reform efforts that we're going to discuss later on. Thank you for your time this evening. I'm going to turn it back over to Ana Mascarenhas.
Thank you, Francesca. This next set of presentations will cover how DTSC has adapted and how we're continuing to adapt to meet our mission during the pandemic that we're all experiencing. And the pandemic has affected us all in different ways, directly and indirectly. And we know that communities who have already been experiencing disproportionate environmental burdens are also experiencing deeper impacts of COVID in our communities. And this was really the first step that we discussed early in 2020. And we want to continue to emphasize in our work, which is how important it is to lead, communicate, and act with compassion and respect for each other and all the communities we serve. Next slide, please. On this slide, we are showing how the Office of Environmental Equity is organized. I'm the Deputy Director and Tribal Liaison, and we have 3 programs focused on environmental justice, also referred to as EJ, public participation, and tribal affairs. And as you just saw from the DTSC strategic plan, EJ is a department-wide goal in our 4-year roadmap. And that means that every DTSC program is expected to learn, to think through, and to incorporate EJ into our work. Our teams across the programs provide consulting, collaboration, and working with internal and external partners to work towards accomplishing this. So the focus of the EJ goal and program is to work to prevent harm and protect California's most vulnerable and environmentally burdened communities. It's about continuously working towards that goal to facilitate communication and dialogue with communities affected by our work and to move towards more fair, just, and equitable solutions. That EJ goal, as referenced earlier, the actions and key performance indicators are on the website as well. Throughout the pandemic and with the legacy and ongoing racial injustices in our country, painfully brought forward last year and ongoing, we're continuing to take steps alongside Cali, PA on racial equity and EJ as well. Racial equity acknowledges the intergenerational effects of racism and discrimination, and our goal is to implement strategies so that our historically marginalized communities can fully participate in and benefit from our programs and services. That's transformative change, and to really bring that about, we need to, at DTSC, continue to develop our capacity to think holistically about systems in place that have provided advantage while disadvantaging others. And sharing on this slide as well, just that next week, we're formally launching a series of department-wide staff trainings covering implicit bias, cultural awareness, moving on to racial equity topics. And we'll be sharing back for your feedback metrics and outcomes on racial equity through the strategic plan as well. Next slide, please. Early in the pandemic, we issued public participation guidance for all DTSC staff focused on equity and environmental justice. And we guided and recommended to teams to directly confer with communities and community-based organizations when deciding if processes, decisions, or activities should be postponed or adapted in support of equity and public participation. This did result in some activities being postponed or adapted in early 2020 to allow more time for people to engage in public participation, understanding there were many, many immediate needs that people and communities are adapting to. And we have continued to work in many ways. We'll hear more from the program, other programs later, and are very grateful for all of our essential workers who continue to work directly in communities to make neighborhoods safer. For example, our largest cleanup taking place in the state, there are 25 cleanup crews every single week in the field where essential workers are continuing to engage in people in the cleanup, do community outreach, and oversee the removal of lead contaminated soil. Just to note that over the past year, we've convened over 40 remote public meetings and major stakeholder briefings, and nearly 3,000 unique logins. Understanding not everybody has familiarity and there's a big learning curve, we've still done our best to stay safe and engage during this time of the pandemic. We're also working to incorporate more pre-surveys and post-surveys, and hearing that our previous video conferencing platform was really not user-friendly. In response to community feedback, we shifted and are now using Zoom as a platform, and we hope that it is better for engaging with us. Next slide, please. Noting earlier as well that in March of 2020, we adopted a tribal consultation policy. And just over the last year alone, we've continued to work to engage, notify, and consult with tribes. In the cleanup project alone, cleanup programs, more than 300 engagement letters have been sent, and we've learned a lot about the need for more protocols and better protocols to ensure meaningful engagement and consultation. So we're developing those as well. And in training, we're very fortunate to be working alongside right now in partnership with the National Indian Justice Center to deliver all staff trainings on cultural awareness and history of Native Americans in California. Also wanted to make sure and note here on our slide that for any tribal governments who are experiencing impacts related to COVID-19 directly, the Governor's Tribal Advisor is a resource and centralized coordinator of information. And the website is here, tribalaffairs.ca.gov/COVID-19. And our tribal coordinators and team members are also here to assist. And looking forward in 2021, we will continue to seek the types of resources and authorities so that we can better partner with community organizations, tribes, and all of our partners as well. Again, over the past year, we are working to emphasize the need for all of us to communicate and act with compassion and respect for all communities in all of our work together. And that is a segue to invite Ali Westcott to present the next set of slides.
Thank you, Anna. The Office of Communications is a team of passionate and proud public servants dedicated to keeping stakeholders informed about DTSC's critical work. Communications is about breaking down walls and building bridges. The key to effective communications is to respect people, to listen and to hear and respond. We've done that starting internally from within the Office of Communications and across DTSC, and also externally through listening and being responsive. Next slide, please. I was just appointed to this position 1 year ago, just 1 month before offices closed due to the pandemic. What my team has learned this past year is that our bond was strong enough to excel during remote collaboration, and we miss each other incredibly. We've been able to leverage technology in partnership with our incredible Office of Environmental Information to help unify and inform while also working remotely. In fact, our work turned out to not only be possible, but in many ways we exceeded our own expectations. A few of our accomplishments this year include instituting remote all staff and manager meetings. launching regular COVID-19 announcements through internal and external websites, email, and video communications, holding public meetings in partnership with public participation, as you just heard Anna speak about. And all of this work is measured in line with DTSC values of being data-driven. We're using surveys, focus groups, and metrics to determine the success of our outcomes. Next slide, please. I tell my team that even if a product or concept is great, there is always opportunity to make it stronger and more responsive to audience needs. We have a proud culture of continuous improvement and, again, driven by data. Our 2021 priorities are focused on strengthening cross-program planning and coordination to improve strategic communications planning and execution, improve the web user experience, both internally and externally, improve stakeholder partnership and outreach. That includes all of our stakeholders from academic, community-based organizations, industry folks, and legislative liaisons. Thank you. Next slide, please. Carl, you're up.
Thank you, Allie. Good evening. My name is Carl Palmer. I'm the Deputy Director for the Safer Consumer Products Program, and I'm happy to be here tonight to speak with you and to hear from you. Briefly, our Safer Consumer Products Program's mission is really to protect people, our communities, and our environment from hazardous chemicals that are found in consumer products. These graphics on this slide just are a small snapshot, if you will, of some of the things that we're working on, things like personal care and beauty products that we put on our bodies every day. The graphic in the middle is something we developed when we were looking at per and polyfluorinated alkyl substances, or PFAS substances, that are used on carpets and rugs to prevent stains and to make them water resistant. But we see that those chemicals get into the dust in our homes and our children, gets into our waterways, and there are many pathways to exposure. And these chemicals last for hundreds of years, and they have a variety of hazardous properties that we're concerned about. And lastly, you see the coho salmon there. And one of the things we're looking at are certain chemicals in automotive tires that have recently been found to kill coho salmon in the Northwest. And so we're looking at those types of things. So we do our work by identifying specific products that we're concerned about, and then we require that the manufacturers that sell those products into California must go through a rigorous alternatives analysis to see if they can identify safer ways to make their product that will both be effective in their use, but also be more protective to us and our environment. Next slide, please. For the Safer Consumer Products Program, unlike our other programs, we spend most of our time in the office. We are not out in the communities working, so we've been able to do all of our work via telework. And we were well prepared for that because we're used to working across teams, across distance, and we extensively use tools that, like working on the cloud and other electronic tools. So in that respect, COVID has been tough, but not. We were pretty well prepared for it. We were adversely impacted because we don't have the opportunity to mentor our new staff, to train together, and to do face-to-face collaboration. But we've also found that as the department improves our ability to hold public meetings and meet with stakeholders both here and throughout the country, that it's easier to collaborate in that respect. So things like our Green Ribbon Science Panel, which brings in experts from around the country, is easier to do in this environment that we have now. So there are some upsides. Next slide, please. I just wanted to take a moment to highlight that our program every 3 years puts out what we call our priority products work plan. This is a menu, if you will, of the categories of products that we're going to be looking at for the next 3 years for our work and for which we plan to regulate. So what we've done is we put out just recently this draft work plan. We would love for you to look at it. It identifies 6 different categories that are very broad that we're going to be looking at picking products from to focus on. And those categories are things like beauty and personal care products, cleaning products, building products, food packaging, and children's products. So we have a comment period open till about a month from now, and we're going to have a public workshop online on the 17th of March. We'd love for you to take a look at the work plan and give us your feedback. We need your input so that we can make sure that we are focusing on the things that are most important and impactful, and that we can hear from you. So this is just my pitch to you to take a look at the work plan. Let us know if you have questions or comments, and we'll look forward to moving forward on that. So thanks for your time. And now I'll introduce Grant Cope, who's the Deputy Director of our cleanup program. Grant?
Thanks, Carl. Thanks very much. Hello, everybody again. I'm going to describe the cleanup program's actions to protect staff, contractors, and people in communities from the spread of COVID while still doing field work at cleanup sites. Let me begin by just touching on the cleanup program itself. We're a science-based organization that goes out into communities to protect California's people and environment from dangerous chemicals by cleaning up sites. There's more than 300 scientists, toxicologists, geologists, multidisciplinary staff, all working at sites across the state. Roughly 1 in 3 people in California lives within a mile of one of the sites where we work on. About 50% of those are environmental justice communities, which mean that people in those communities are already overburdened by pollution. Our cleanups help to reduce the environmental threats in those communities and provide opportunities for revitalizations of neighborhoods. Next slide, please. Now, given the importance of this work, when the pandemic hit, the governor declared that cleanup activities were essential within the state, which means they could continue so long as they could be done with certain safeguards that prevent the spread of COVID. We jumped into action and produced draft guidance that essentially looked at 2 things. What factors were needed to determine if something was truly essential out in the field to do? And then secondly, what actions could we take to prevent the spread of COVID? We came up with draft guidance, ran it through both the State Water Resources Control Board as well as US EPA to kind of refine the guidance, and also to make certain that there were some commonalities between the different cleanup programs so that there was kind of a baseline level of protection. I don't want to go into the entire guidance with you. It's very long and detailed, but I'll give you some examples of the provisions that we included. First of all, redundancy. We wanted at least 2 people to make a determination that the work was in fact essential. Another good example is there are several people who always review the preventative COVID prevention measures in both DTSC's health and safety plans, but also the health and safety plans of our contractors, because we are working in sometimes, close proximity to one another. And therefore we want to make certain that that level of protection is provided across the entire site. Our industrial hygienists in particular play the role of ensuring to talk with staff, but also reviewing contractors' health and safety plans for the latest COVID prevention measures. Next slide, please. So I want to go from the kind of macro to the micro and just look at one site in particular. DTSC is overseeing the cleanup of residential properties in Los Angeles that are contaminated with lead in the soil. Currently, we're at about 2,300 cleanups. DTSC is actually overseeing the cleanup of more properties more quickly than any other urban lead site in the country. So we're very proud of the work that's being done in those communities to protect people from that lead. Once again, that work can only occur during the pandemic if there are certain COVID prevention measures. We've worked with industrial hygienists and the contractors to make certain that all of the measures that we can pack in to that work are being both adhered to, but also updated. Let me give you a couple examples. The teams working on a site basically break up into crews, and each crew member has his or her own dedicated equipment. The equipment is cleaned before and after use. If one cleanup crew member tests positive or has symptoms, they're sent home for 14 days to isolate, and they cannot return to the work site without having a negative test for COVID. That is far stronger than what the current recommendations are at the federal or state level. Let me give you another example. If a crew member reports that they went to an after-hours high-risk event, they cannot return to work for 10 days. These are all important measures because we don't want to just do the minimum. We want to make certain that we're going beyond the minimum to protect not just the people on the site, but the members in the community in which we're working. With that, I would like to hand over the presentation to Rizgar Ghazi.
Thank you, Grant, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Again, my name is Rizgar Ghazi. I'm the Deputy Director for the Hazardous Waste Management Program. Could you, next slide, please? I wanted to show you our organization for the Hazardous Waste Management Program. Our program consists of 4 divisions. We have the Enforcement and Emergency Response Division. We have the Permitting Division, also the Office of Criminal Investigations, and Policy and Program Support Branch. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about a little bit about the challenges that we faced during initial shutdown because of COVID, and what did the department do and to react to the shutdown, and how we made sure that we continue our work in protecting Californians, and at the same time protecting our own staff from COVID-19 virus and the pandemic that we're dealing with last year. Within the Hazardous Waste Management Program, we identified 3 unique areas that required immediate actions. And the first being, we wanted to make sure, because of the shutdown, we will make sure our staff are able to carry out their duties and work from home. The second unique area that we identified at that time was providing proper guidance and equipment to our field staff. As Grant had just talked about, there's guidance that came out, and we work closely with our health and safety staff and to ensure that we continue our essential work. And this is work that our enforcement staff, our criminal investigators, and emergency response staff are required to be in the field and protecting Californians. And the third area that we looked at was public engagement. As you know, the Permitting Program works closely with the public participation staff, and the initial shutdown basically cut off our ability to have in-person meetings with the community, and that was a challenge for us, and we looked at ways of how we could address that challenge. And also we looked at providing assistance to the regulated community, and this is specifically important to us because a lot of these businesses were shut down, and we wanted to ensure that these facilities are managing their waste properly during the shutdown. Next slide, please. So we took several steps. We retooled our work, and one of the first things we did, we worked closely with our IT shop and department staff to ensure that our staff have equipment. This includes laptops, monitors, with a secure access to DTSC's networks, and that was a challenge. And again, this is working from home. So all of our staff initially started working from home until we were able to equip them and to provide them with the proper equipment to be in the field. We work closely again with our Office of Health and Safety. This is where industrial hygienists develop guidance for our field staff so they can do their inspections and investigations in a safe manner. We also worked with our public participation branch and the Office of Environmental Equity to lay out procedures for best practices for video streaming and public meetings. And of course, our regulatory assistance unit worked closely with our Office of Communications to be responsive to our stakeholders and the regulated community for safe management of hazardous waste. During that time, initial shutdown, we received a lot of calls from businesses and specifically how they could manage the hazardous waste during the shutdown. So we worked closely with the stakeholders and regulated community to ensure that the wastes are managed properly. And again, this is where our enforcement and our criminal investigators were really working closely to ensure these facilities are operating in a safe, protected manner. Next slide, please. So the outcome. So again, I don't want to repeat what Grant said. The hazardous waste management, so to to the cleanup program. Staff, we consider our staff are essential workers, and they need to be in the field to ensure these hazardous waste facilities and generators are inspected, and we can do our criminal investigation. So our staff were able to be in the field. I just want to highlight one though that's really highlighted last year was the fires that we had last year. Our emergency response unit was in the field, and basically we worked on 16 fires, consists of 19 county, and we assessed 3,000 properties during that time. So our staff did not miss a beat during this COVID. Again, this would not been able, we were able to do that with our support from our industrial hygienists, other equipment, the PPE equipment that we had to bring in, and to train our staff to be protective during that time. We successfully were able to support the cleanup during the wildfires. And of course, permitting was also now with the training with use of Zoom, we were able to conduct our permit meetings and our public hearings through Zoom, and we're learning. This is a new technology to the department, to the permit program, but however, we are successfully, we're back on track on issuing our permit decision in a timely manner and engaging the community through via Zoom and video conference. With that, I'm gonna pass it on to Meredith. Thank you.
Oh, next slide, please. Thank you, Rizgar. We are now at the first question and comment portion for this presentation. This slide provides an overview of the 3 ways you can ask a question or make a comment. To use Zoom audio, use the raised hand feature at the bottom of your screen. When we call on you, you will be invited to unmute your audio. For anyone calling in by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. The facilitator will say the last 3 digits of your phone number when it's your turn. You will then press *6 to unmute your audio. If you have a question in Spanish, the interpreter will ask your question on your behalf. To have your question read by the facilitator, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So for those of you who are listening in Spanish, please notify your interpreter when you have a question or comment. We'll display this information once again when we have the second Q&A session before the end of the evening. Next slide. Oh, pardon me. Okay, so first question I'd like to address to Anna. Anna, are you with us?
Hi, yes.
Perfect, thank you. So I'd like to talk about COMETCO and public participation. There's a question regarding, can the decision to renew COMETCO's permit be postponed until there's an in-person community meeting and input? And can you talk about how we're making sure that community meetings are inclusive during this time of remote meetings?
Thank you, Ellie. And I saw this question came in from Adriana Quintero early on to the chat. And just to remind folks to please use the Q&A, and it looks like people are starting to raise their hands to also ask questions verbally. So for COMETCO, there are a number of different actions happening on the permit review and also the corrective action or cleanup. And there was a community update mailed out at the beginning of this year that provides an overview of that. And then also there will be a community meeting in the next several months to provide an update and invite dialogue on all of those pieces. And so we can follow up with you directly as well, Adriana, to make sure that you're on the mailing list and notification list. But there will be in the next 2 months a meeting to review where DTSC is at in the decision in reviewing the permit, and also on corrective action and any updates to provide on enforcement as well. And you also included a question around what we're doing to make meetings inclusive. We definitely understand that even if someone has a smartphone, there still is a learning curve and a barrier often to participating in meetings through Zoom. So we are using the call-in feature so that people, as we are following health and safety recommendations and protocols, we provide a call-in number for this meeting, and we're doing that for many of our public meetings as well, and then providing presentations as a link on our website, so that even if someone doesn't have an internet connection, they can follow along with the PDF of the presentations. And we're open to lots of suggestions on how to improve that, but our goal is to make sure that each meeting can be accessible if someone just has a phone access. And then we can also reach out to us if we can get the presentation to you in a different way. So those are two ways. And we have seen through, especially a lot of our other agencies, that a number of people do prefer to call in. And so we want to keep that open and inclusive way while we're still having to do remote meetings at this time. Allie, you're muted.
Thank you, Anna. I'm going to go to some raised hands here. I'd like to start with Yvonne Martinez-Watson. Feel free to unmute, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Sorry, the button didn't come up right away. Yes, this is Yvonne Martinez-Watson. I'm the chair of the Environmental and Social Justice Committee for the Sierra Club Angeles chapter. I have a question about the work crews that are out cleaning up the Exide lead battery contamination site in East Los Angeles. This is the site with 10,000 affected properties, 100,000 residents that have been affected by lead. I know that there's a lot of independent contractors who are working to help with that cleanup effort. And I heard during the presentation that due to COVID, one of your protocols is that you're asking people to self-report if they've been at some sort of an event where they may have been exposed to COVID. And I would like to ask, how in the world can you enforce that if the whole incentive is to keep working? What's to prevent anybody from not telling you that they were at an event? And do you do any on-site testing to make sure that the workers are not exposing the community? Because this is a community that's already been hit really hard. And this is where the worst COVID outcomes are right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Grant or Sue, are you available?
Yeah, I'm here. Great question, Yvonne. So the self-reporting is one of the requirements that the contractor has for their staff, and it's actually been employed. So it's been effective in terms of helping to prevent people who have put themselves in situations where they could potentially have been exposed not to be on the job site. Importantly, that preventative measure is not required by CDC. It's not required by, it's not a federal requirement by the Centers for Disease Control. It's going beyond what would otherwise be required. There's a whole host of measures in addition. For example, checking temperatures before people come on, asking about symptoms. So there's daily protocols. And also, I'd refer back to what I described before, whereas if somebody has symptoms or has tested positive, they don't come back for 14 days and they have to have a negative test. Now, 14 days is once again beyond the minimum that's required by CDC. It's far stronger in terms of making certain that we're helping to prevent the spread of COVID. So what the contractors are doing is really solid. It's really fantastic in terms of putting a very prevention first approach to the spread of COVID in that community.
Grant, thank you so much for your time. Deborah Bayer, if you could unmute, please. Deborah, there you are.
Yeah, I mean, listening to this, I'm impressed with how much work you guys have done and have to do, and you got this plan and stuff. But when you're on the other end of it, the DTSC just doesn't feel very responsive. So you can have a really good communication plan, but it's what actually occurs on that level where a resident, who's concerned about a hazardous waste site, say, feels like get somebody from DTSC to listen to them, feel like they're being listened to. And even when we meet with you guys, it still feels like our questions aren't being answered. our opinion, which is very informed, is not being responded to. Right now, for me, I know these are people all over California, but I'm in Richmond, California, and we live near basically a Superfund site that the DTSC does not want to clean up very effectively. There's going to be 550, I think it's 550,000 square feet of contaminated soil with gases like TCE, pesticides, heavy metals like arsenic and lead. And the DTSC's cleanup recommendation was to pour concrete on top of it and put in a few vapor extraction wells and ignore sea level rise, because this piece of land, which is an old chemical factory, is right on the sea, right on the marsh, on the bay. And sea level is going to change everything within the next, 20, 40 years. Anyway, this all allowed the city to put out a permit for 4,000 residential units. And we just feel like this is crazy. Why would you build on top of, contaminated soil, on top of the toxic waste? So I guess that's the question. I'm sorry to go on about it. I just wanted to explain where I was coming from.
Okay, I think, so we have Grant Cope here, our Director of Site Mitigation, who is prepared to address, I think, your entire question.
Yeah, absolutely. So once I was put into the position of overseeing the cleanup program, before I'd been formally appointed, I heard about Zeneca and went and met with the people, not just in the CAG meetings themselves, but met with them outside of the CAG and spoke with them, listened to their concerns, walked around the site with them, and took that information back to my staff. And we used that in our discussions. Zeneca is a good example, I think, of a very difficult decision. What do you do at a site that has what are essentially called cinders, but they're like rocks that have been processed to take out sulfur? What do you do with a tremendous amount of this material that would take tens of thousands of truck trips to dispose of, to excavate and dispose of? So using heavy equipment to excavate it, and then driving those trucks through communities that are already overburdened by air pollution. Those actions themselves have an impact on the environmental threats within communities and environmental justice communities. And so when we took a look at the protectiveness, which is there's two main criteria that we have to meet. The cleanup has to be protective, and it has to meet all federal, state, and local standards. When we took a look at the protectiveness, including the short term, what are the threats from the cleanup itself, but also long term, the balance of that analysis showed that it was better to cut off the pathway of exposure, which is done frequently, not just in California, but all across the country, where you leave waste in place. And then when you do that, you have to be very cognizant of the fact that there will be regular check-ins on the protectiveness of the systems that are put into place, separating people from whatever contamination is left on the site. That's what is required at Zeneca. In terms of sea level rise, that was considered. There's extensive discussion about it. It is a serious issue in the Bay Area, not just at Zeneca. And Superfund, which kind of is our guiding lodestar, if you will, on what is required at sites where you leave waste in place, requires a 5-year review. Every 5 years, we have to take a look at the protectiveness of that remedy. And so what we will do is reassess the knowledge about sea level rise during that 5-year review to make certain that the cleanup is still protective. And if it's not, then we will require the responsible parties to take action to make certain that it is. Last thing is sea level rise is something that we're trying to tackle just internally within DTSC in a more consistent fashion to ensure more consistent decision-making across the state wherever it becomes an issue. We're working with USGS, but also with other state partners to try and come up with a consistent approach to it, rather than using the one guidance document that really, and it's by the state, but we want something that's even more kind of articulate in providing us with information to make decisions. Sorry, that was a long-winded response, but it's an important site and it's an important issue, and I'm really glad that you brought it up.
Thank you, Grant. I appreciate the thoroughness of your answer. Rizgar, this next question I think you can help with. Rizgar, are you there?
I'm here. Hi.
Wonderful. Hello. So can you talk a little bit about VSP and how we use it to sort of rate companies that their violations over the years and how we apply that to permitting?
Sure. Thank you for that question. So VSP is it's a tool that we developed, one of the first tools in the nation that's developed to assess facilities on their environmental, and their compliance history. And this tool really it's a method of requiring the department, puts requirements in the department to assess these facilities and to take actions depending on their VSP standings and compliance history review when we do these VSP scores. It brings a transparent way of evaluating facilities against each other and it brings consequences to the facility if they are continue to be a VSP with an acceptable score. It requires the department to take action against these facilities. It's a great tool that we just initiated 2 years ago, and this is our second year of implementing that program. In fact, we're going through a process of evaluating some facilities, and now we're doing a tiering evaluation to whether the department should take denial actions against these facilities, and that there's public meetings that'll be scheduled in the next few months to make that determination, and we're following up on the requirements of that regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Rizgar. I'd like to take another, we don't seem to have any questions on the Spanish line, so I'm going to go back to hands raised. I'd like to hear from Lucy Barnes, please. Would you please unmute? Lucy?
Yeah, hi. My name's Lucy, and I'm a high school student from Los Angeles. And I wanted to acknowledge the oil spill that happened in Richmond on February 9th. And I wanted to ask what prevention measures are in place to ensure that oil spills like that one don't happen again, and what ways that like big companies like Chevron are held accountable for their actions and for these accidents that affect communities.
Okay, thank you. I think Grant can best address, or is that Rizgar? Grant, you're muted.
Do you want to take this one, Rizgar?
Sure.
Thank you.
So I apologize. I'm not familiar with this particular spill. I just want to kind of frame the question for our hazardous waste facilities. We have every hazardous waste facility that we work on. The part of the permit requirement is to have a contingency plan, so a spill prevention plan. And that spill prevention plan requires a facility to not only immediately take action, it requires to notify the local fire department, the DTSC, and the authorities surrounding that facility. So we do have a contingency plan that we apply immediately and requires a facility to take immediate corrective action and notification to the communities and a spill response to be followed up with that. That is for our hazardous waste facilities. However, you mentioned Chevron oil spill. That notification would have gone to the water board, and they would work with them. If there's releases to the surface waters, the water board would be involved, and the local jurisdiction would have been involved in the spill prevention, and they would have implemented their contingency plan as well. Thank you.
Rizgar, since I have you, there's a follow-up question to VSP. Is there anything that you would change about the VSP rating system?
Absolutely. Again, thank you for that question. The VSP is, like I said earlier, it's a new regulations and hasn't been done. And there are some, we are learning from it, and we're making changes within our program, how we inspect facilities, how we document our inspections, and how we follow through our enforcement cases. There are some changes that we want to bring into the VSP regulations, and this year we will be holding what's called pre-rulemaking workshops to get feedback from the communities and impacted the people that have interest in it. And we were hoping that we could initiate a rulemaking at the end of the year. So be on the lookout for our website. We will start that pre-rulemaking discussion, what changes we should bring to bring additional improvements to the way we do implement the VSP scores. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next I'd like to go to Florence. If you could unmute, please. Florence?
Yes. I'm the chair of the Del Amo Action Committee, and we have in our community 2 Superfund sites. On one side of Normandy, we have the Montrose Chemical Site, the largest manufacturer of DDT in the country when it was operating. And on the other side of the street, we have the remains of a synthetic rubber factory that operated before and after World War II. We are constantly commenting, participating in meetings, asking that things be done. Our relationship with the US EPA has really declined significantly. They have meaningless public meetings that do not enable meaningful comment. And we have a site in our community. On one end of our community is a park that we've worked very hard to bring about. And on the other end of our community is a vacant property that was used by a hazardous waste transporter and emergency response company for many years. On the eastern end of that property is contamination with DDT, which EPA has failed to remediate. Now, EPA has reached a prospective purchasers agreement with a company that wants to build a warehouse on the entire circumference of that property. And we are objecting strongly to the manufacture of that warehouse. We have problems with the fact that the whole site is contaminated and no one has done anything about it. We have problems with the fact that no one fully appreciates the impact that having a trucking warehouse right directly adjacent to homes will cause. We've commented on a deed covenant document. We've commented on a very poorly developed soil management plan, and we have heard nothing from DTSC. We would like to know that DTSC will help us to develop a stronger relationship with the new US EPA. At one point, we had very good communication with them. We had a technical advisor. They fired the advisor. They canceled our stakeholder meetings. And we'd like to know if DTSC is going to support us in our effort to get the right things done.
Thank you. Grant?
Yeah. Hey, Florence, this is Grant. Yeah, as you rightly point out, DTSC is the lead for that site. I'd be more than happy to talk with you and the DTSC people who consult with EPA on the cleanup to go over the issues that you just raised. You know, I don't know what's easiest, but I can definitely reach out to you and set up a time for staff to talk.
Okay, and I would bring in my director, Cynthia Babich, and you can tell that we're not happy customers. And it's really a shame because now we're finding this warehouse and it's a pretty dismal situation. So I would appreciate that. And I will talk to my executive director and we'll try to set something up, and talking with you would be terrific. Thank you.
Great. No, thank you, honestly.
Thank you, Florence, and thank you, Grant. Next, I'd like to call on Jane Williams, please. Can you unmute, Jane? Jane, are you with us?
I am.
Hi.
So I I feel for all of my colleagues on the phone. I think there's a lot of frustration across the state with the agency. And the state is really struggling and suffering because DTSC continues to refuse to take action on a number of policy-related issues. Number one, 2 years ago, we sent a letter on financial assurances. Nothing has been done on that. The vapor intrusion guidance document, the agency has been working on it with the Water Board now for over half a decade. For over half a decade, we've been trying to get metal shredders regulated, including legislation that was passed by the legislature. We're still waiting on the report on the LABRIC program. Now we've been waiting for that for 3 years. We requested that you put out the spigot tool so communities would know what's in their water and what's coming towards their water in the future. That's been now 4 years. And then for folks working on contaminated sites, it seems like all the remedies that we're seeing out of this administration are super fencing and super capping. So you can imagine everyone's frustration on the ground. And I'm just wondering, are we ever going to get any kind of progress on any of these issues before we get a new governor?
Thank you, Jane. I think I'd like to start with Rizgar. Can you talk a little bit about financial insurance?
Sure. Thank you, Jane, for that question. I'm going to answer to the areas that you mentioned, Jane, the metal shredder regulations and the policy issues. As you recall, the department came up with a metal shredders report as a draft. We received comments, and we're in the process of finalizing that document. That report should come out shortly. I meant very shortly, within the next couple of months. That should be available for you to look at, and it does outline some decisions the department will make on the metal shredders and how we should manage metal shredders, and so that's forthcoming soon. As for financial assurance, definitely that's something that we have looked at your letter, and we went back and evaluated all the financial assurance mechanisms that we have for our operating hazardous waste facilities, and we part of that process. Now we review our cost estimates and for a implementation of the closure on a 5-year cycle, and make changes to those financial mechanisms as the permit is renewed. We're talking internally how we could make those changes on a regular basis versus waiting for the permit renewals. Similarly, for the corrective action projects, we, as part of the SB 673, this is the bill, that LAR bill that required the department to look at how we make permit decisions. And that regulation, we revised the requirements for financial assurance to be brought up much earlier in the process. And again, for remediation sites, typically these financial assurance mechanisms do not put in place till we have a remedy selected. That regulation moved the requirements much earlier in the process. We are again going back, I mentioned earlier when we looked at the VSP, and we will go back and look at our financial assurance, when these financial assurance requirements will be required for our corrective action sets. That's something we're hoping to address during one of the regulations that we're working on, cumulative impacts, as part of the SB 673. So there's a package that we have a framework that we developed, and that's coming out shortly to address some of the issues that you brought up regarding financial assurance and the VSP. We're hoping that we can address that during that time as well. Thank you.
Hey, this is Grant. I can handle the other issues. In terms of vapor intrusion, I think it's actually a really good example of not just DTSC, obviously, because it's the Water Board and DTSC as well as Cal EPA that are doing it, but of us taking very seriously the need to solicit public input on a guidance document, and then use that input in order to modify the guidance document. It has taken a long time. It has. There's no doubt about it. It's cutting edge science. It's a new effort using this guidance document within Cal EPA. We're close to issuing it. We're looking at the next couple months for getting it out. And it'll be nice once it's done because it'll provide that needed guidance and consistency at sites across the state. In terms of the LABRIC report, reports go through reviews. That's part of the state process. So I hear you. I want it out as badly as anybody else. As soon as the review is done, we can issue it. In terms of the Spigot tool, so we use a variety of different tools. This is one of them. The information that goes into Spigot that would tell people, Jane, what you said, what is a threat to their water, that's publicly available information. This is one internal tool that we use that provides that information in one kind of consolidated fashion, but the information that goes into that is publicly available. And then in terms of remedies, so remedies are often a mix, right, of capping as well as dig and haul, as well as treatment. I think that if you actually take a look at the remedies that we have across the state, you're going to find that played out. So it's a function really of the criteria that we use to ensure the protectiveness of the remedy, land use decisions that allow for either commercial or industrial uses rather than residential. And then sometimes just the technologies that we need to use, that we have to use in order to get the cleanups done.
Okay, thank you, Rizgar and Grant. I just want to say that we know we ran a few minutes late in the first segment of presentation, so we will be adding that time towards the end. For those of you whose hands are already raised in the queue, we'll be opening up the Q&A for you before moving on to the next round of presentations. For those of you who have typed questions in Q&A, we will be following up with you. So next, I'd like to call on Luis Almeida, please. Luis?
Yeah, hi. It's Luis Olmedo with Comité Cívico del Valle. I have a couple comments and a question. I've heard Grant Cope say that it's a science-based organization. And I've heard that, over the years, and it seems that it's not very clear as to how, if it's solely a science-based organization, where does equity and environmental justice and the engagement with environmental justice, the engagement of enforcement with environmental justice, the engagement of all departments and divisions with environmental justice, and how does equity fit into all of this? Because it seems a very top-down mentality when we talk about this. We are a science-based organization. Therefore, if you're not a scientist and you can't engage with all our 300 scientists, then guess what? You're left out. So that's one of the comments that I like to hear from Grant Cope. We have an issue in Brawley, California, which is a relatively small spot of a toxic site that at one point I told Rizgar, and I think I've told Meredith, I said, look, if you can clean this up, then at least it shows that you can clean up some of the lower level, small, tiny speck in the state where you have an actual a site operator, which is Chevron in this case. You can go out there and ask them to clean it up, which to some extent they haven't done excavation. But the biggest issue is that we've asked Rizgar, Meredith, and I don't know how many others, have been aware of this within DTSC, go across the street and test the community, their concerns. There has been accidents there. There has been the spillage and loss of materials into the neighborhood. And the response that I've gone from Rizgar and others is, we don't know, what's out there. We're concerned about the cost of what that might cost for cleanup. And we don't know the full extent of the historical uses. And, if you want to have a dialogue, we can have it. I always find it unfair when we have, put up a comment and then you get to have the last word and then we don't get to do a rebuttal, right? So I'll leave it at that. I have a lot more, but why don't we just start with that?
Okay, I'd like to start with Grant.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Luis. Thanks for the comment. Equity is essential. It's right. Let me begin by saying, first of all, the law requires us to be a science-based organization. Therefore, we hire toxicologists, geologists. You know, we have to use that. We have to be nimble, and we've got to be multifaceted. Therefore, we also have to take into account environmental justice and equity considerations, and we do. Nearly 50% of the sites that we work on in total are in environmental justice communities. We're in environmental justice communities across the state, cleaning up contamination. With orphan sites, which are without responsible parties, fully funded by the state, I believe that all of them are in environmental justice sites, environmental justice communities. We're also developing a LABRIC program. You heard about Jane's concern regarding the review of the report. The screening for the LABRIC program to prioritize potential sites takes into account a whole variety of factors, including past lead acid battery recycling facilities or foundries, but also other equity factors that will allow us to prioritize limited public resources in those communities where environmental justice is a concern. So in terms of Pure Grow, I think that's a really good example of, at least for me, of going from a remedy that was basically capping. And when you and some other people questioned the adequacy of that, I got together with staff and we told Chevron that they could not just do capping. So they've actually come out with a new plan. It gets rid of a stockpile of soil that's been on site, and they're developing an engineering report right now to do excavation of the contaminated areas on site. All this is laid out in the decision document. In terms of offsite, we sent you a letter last week that describes basically everything that I've already said, and also that we are still working with ARB to do that offsite sampling. So I would take a look at that letter. You contact Peter. He's always available. Give him a call or give me a call, whatever you'd like, and we can provide even more details than we've already provided to you in the past.
Okay, thank you, Grant. Rizkar?
Thank you, Luis, for the comments. Absolutely, as Grant said, we are a science-based organization. We also focus on environmental justice. And in the recent last couple of years, Department Hazardous Waste Management Program have put in some regulations that requires us to look at these facilities, such as the VSP, and focusing on enforcement on environmental justice communities. Our strategic plan, as Francesca had described earlier, does have a environmental justice, and we are implementing those requirements within our organization. For example, the enforcement and our OCI group is working on an initiative that focuses on environmental justice. That you should be seeing that in the next few months. That's going to come out. The focus, again, the decision that we make in the department has to address environmental justice issues. Additionally, the department within the Hazardous Waste Management Program, we're working on a regulation that addresses cumulative impacts and community impacts based on our decisions. And that's something that a framework it's going through the process. And that, again, that will be coming out shortly. That addresses the same question you just brought up. How do we incorporate environmental justice into our decision-making process? OCI is a group that we have, a very small group, and I'm not sure if you participated in the process last week on the workload analysis. This is a small group, and we're asking for additional resources for that program. They do good work, and they do a lot of their work is focused on environmental justice communities. Just an example, we went after a facility that operates in West Oakland, in environmental justice communities. Our OCI folks went after this facility and were able to settle and bring in a lot of requirements for this facility to operate in a protective manner. That settlement included $2.1 million for the community surrounding that facility. So we are out there, and our focus is to bring protections in the environmental justice communities. And please be lookout for our enforcement initiative that are going to come out shortly. And definitely would love to engage you in that discussion when we come up with a draft. Thank you.
Thank you, Rizgar. Next, I'd like to hear from Bradley Angel. Would you please unmute, Bradley?
Good evening. So you can hear me. Yeah, thanks for giving me a moment. I want to, I'm the director of Green Action for Health and Environmental Justice. And as DTSC knows, we work with communities from the Mexican border to Northern California. We from urban communities to rural and indigenous communities. And they have one thing in common. They're pretty much screwed by DTSC. And, I could laugh, except it's not funny to hear DTSC claim that it's a science-based organization, because it's not. Science doesn't appear to matter. And I'll come back to that in a moment. I'm really concerned that, Rizgar was just talking about the development of criteria to consider cumulative impacts. What he conveniently did not mention is DTSC was required by state law, Senate Bill 673, and by the 2016 Title VI Civil Rights Settlement, the Kettleman City Civil Rights Settlement, that applies a lot of it statewide. And both the law, the state legislature, the law, and the civil rights settlement that the head of Cal EPA and the head of DTSC signed, DTSC committed to adopting those criteria several years ago, is still dragging its feet, and communities are suffering. I want to point out that if DTSC is as great as it seems from the introductions I heard, that how is it that the 2 toxic waste dumps in the state of California are operating on expired permits? These are communities hit hard by pollution, social and economic disparities. They rank high in Cal and virus screen vulnerability. They were hit hard by COVID. In Buttonwillow, DTSC allows Clean Harbors to operate, I think it's 15 years now, on a permit that was actually issued quite through a lot of racial discrimination, 15 years. And are you confident that there's no threat based on that old, terrible EIR? Kettleman City toxic waste dump for years, same thing. I want to also just point out, Grant was talking about, and there was a question from a community member. I was so glad to hear about the Zeneca site in Richmond. Grant, oh, we're science-based. Oh, really? Then how come we heard from Grant, he admitted, you're not using the latest projections? And we agree with Grant that, where to send this stuff, there's a lot of issues with all that. But can you really leave toxic waste at Seneca buried by the waterfront and have people live next to it? Is that science? The same with the Hunters Point shipyard. So here's my question for Meredith, based on all of the above. A week and a half ago, DTSC and the State Department of so-called Public Health testified before the San Francisco Board of Supervisors about the contamination at Treasure Island in San Francisco. And I thought I've heard a lot over the years from our government, but this was right up there. They said, they were asked, do you think it is safe for people to live next to radioactive and toxic waste? And the people we're talking about are ranked very high as vulnerable through Cal and virus screen. They're virtually all people of color, many women-led families, little kids. Many of them had ended up there because the government put them next to the radioactive and toxic waste, and in some cases on top of it, because they were put in subsidized housing. They're between a rock and a hard place. So last week before the Board of Supervisors, our state officials told the Board of Supervisors and the people of San Francisco and all of us that, oh, it's safe because there's a chain link fence and there's a warning sign. So I want to know to Dr. Williams, do you think it's safe? And would you, I'm sure there's a vacancy, would any of you like to live in the subsidized housing, literally with radioactive waste 15 feet from your back window, 15 feet. Would you feel safe bringing your family there? I don't think so. What are you going to do about it? Thank you.
Thank you, Bradley. I'd like to start with Grant. Can you address some of this question, please? And then we'll move on to Meredith.
Sure. Yeah. Bradley, you raised a couple issues. One is a civil rights settlement for Kettleman City. That settlement, DTSC agreed to do essentially what 673 required, which was to consider all the factors and then develop regulations in light of those factors that are part of law. That's what they've done. They've broken it up into phases, but they've done exactly what the settlement requires and done exactly what state law requires. In terms of sea level rise at Zeneca, as I stated before, they did look at the science when analyzing sea level rise effect on the protectiveness of the remedy. Science changes, right? That's why Superfund has a 5-year review process that DTSC will use. And when those updated processes are applied to the site, if we determine that it is not protective, we will require the responsible parties to make modifications to the remedy that ensure it is protective. In terms of Treasure Island and CDPH's clearance process for the island itself, we rely on CDPH, who are by statute delegated the authority to make determinations regarding radiological materials. And when they go in and use their expertise, their scientific expertise, to characterize an area, identify areas that need to be cleaned up, or say additional characterization is needed before they can make a determination on whether or not it is cleared, that is their determination. And that by law, that is what they are supposed to do. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Grant. Meredith, would you like to speak to this as well?
Thank you, Bradley, for your question. And obviously, the Treasure Island is a continuing source of frustration for the community. We continue to stay engaged. We do rely on CDPH for their assessments of radiological hazards. And we're going to continue to monitor that and understand what the situation is and how it evolves and whether or not the appropriate actions are being taken.
Okay, thank you so much, Meredith. One more question before we move on to the next phase of the presentation. Georgia Davis-Bonk, would you please unmute?
Yeah, sure. Hello.
Hello.
My question is, I've noticed Chevron's actually come up twice in this conversation, and I'm aware that larger companies are often responsible for toxic waste and environmental issues. And I'm asking, as the DTSC, how are these companies being held accountable, especially considering right now Chevron has 2 offenses that have been brought up just in this meeting? How are they being held accountable for their actions now, and will work be done on that front?
Thank you, Georgia. Rizgar, is this something you can address?
Sure. Again, thank you for your question. As you stated, Chevron is a large corporation, and their facilities are very large and expansive. They do have hazardous waste permits with the DTSC, and we monitor the requirements of the permit and the permit conditions. So again, they do have activities that not related to our hazardous waste business. However, we do keep monitor those activities as well, and we keep in constant communication with the facility and the local agencies that monitor that facility or permit that facility, such as the water board and the local fire department. For the Chevron facility, we are definitely, when we are checking on a regular basis part of their operation maintenance activities. They do report back to the department whether they're in compliance with their permit. We send our enforcement folks out there on a regular basis to monitor their activities to make sure they're in compliance with their permit. As other activities, I am not too familiar with that non-hazardous waste permit activities at the facility. That's something that I could definitely look into it what we could have that discussion once I look into it and the specifics of that question you had regarding Chevron. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rizgar. Okay, next slide, please. I'd like to welcome Dr. Meredith Williams and Francesca Negri to discuss the proposed reforms for DTSC, workload analysis, and the budget.
Thank you, Allie. And I do want to thank everyone for those very important questions. And I think the questions really do convey a sense of urgency about the impacts of these sites, of these facilities, of old abandoned sites that are contaminated on the communities, on you, on the people that you're fighting to protect. Next slide, please. And I think that everyone agrees that the work that DTSC is undertaking is critically important, and it is happening in communities that are impacted not just by the work that the sites that DTSC is focused on, but by air pollution from transportation corridors, redlining, discrimination, a number of different forces, and that's the landscape in which we're operating. And so it's very critically important that DTSC have what it needs to do the job. At the same time, what I'm hearing is what we've heard for a steady cry for a number of years, that DTSC needs to be transparent, needs to be accountable, and needs to have some fiscal stability to be able to do the job. And in response to those concerns, the administration last year put forth a proposal that would bring transparency and accountability and fiscal stability to the department. And this year, Governor Newsom has reiterated that commitment by proposing that reform and even improving on that reform as we move forward. And so that would provide the resources that we would need to adequately protect the communities that we're talking about. Rizgar talked about our Office of Criminal Investigations and how it is a very small crew, and they are small but mighty. They show tremendous results in terms of their ability to enforce against polluters. And so with that in mind, there's a proposal in the budget, the current budget proposal, to address concerns about DTSC. Next slide, please. And that proposal really is designed to answer three different questions. It's a proposal for some temporary funding and for some to put a governance board in place and to do a number of different things. But fundamentally, the proposal answers three different questions. One is, what programs should DTSC be delivering on? Jane Williams mentioned some things that she wants the department to do, and the department has been in structural deficit for a number of years, and therefore we haven't had the resources to do some of those things. But even with the resources, I think there needs to be good agreement on what the department should be doing, is doing with the resources we have and should be doing as we move forward. The second question is, what are the fees and revenues required to do that work? And then the last one, what is the governance structure? What kind of board really would foster transparency and give community the opportunity to talk to a board and have them hold DTSC accountable? So those are the three questions addressed by the budget proposal. And with that in mind, we're going to focus today on that first question. In order to answer that question, next slide, please. We have been doing a workload analysis. Next slide, please. We know that the funding, no, I'm sorry, previous slide, a little bit of a delay. We know that the funding levels are curtailing our ability to clean up what some estimate to be between 150 and 200,000 contaminated sites throughout the state that need investigation. Rizgar talked about some of the constraints on our ability to enforce on hazardous waste control laws. There are a lot of things we need to do, but what we've done is created a workload analysis that explains what we are doing now and what we could do given more resources. And with that, I'll hand it over to Francesca Negri, our Chief Deputy Director, to explain to you what that workload analysis is and what we found. Francesca, next slide, please.
Thank you, Meredith. So what is a workload analysis? Well, what we did was we took a look at the hours that employees spend on their everyday work. And we can do this because we have a timekeeping system and we have a coding structure where employees go into that timekeeping system and they report how many hours they spend on various projects. We analyzed that data. We analyzed it by type of work being performed. We analyzed it by the type of employee performing the work. And we used that information actually to target some areas for programmatic improvements. And some of those are included in the strategic plan. But every program identified areas with that data to improve their processes. The workload analysis itself, and these reports are available on our website. They provide transparency on how we're using our resources and those steps that we've taken to improve, but also they've identified some areas where we simply don't have sufficient resources to deliver on our mission. We used 2018-19 data, and we've been having stakeholder meetings since January on the results of these analyses. Next slide, please. So there were some key findings that we determined through this analysis. And one, there's just a misalignment between our responsibilities and our resources. There are some statutory requirements that we simply are not resourced to deliver. We don't have an ability to take on new mandates or any new activities. There have been over 90 additional statutory authorities that have been put into place since our fee structure was last modified in 1998. The analysis, as Meredith indicated, includes some examples of services that DTSC could deliver with additional resources. And the examples that we included in the workload analyses were based specifically on feedback we've received from you over the years about levels that you would like to resource or service levels that you would like to see DTSC deliver. And we did do some estimates on the resources necessary to close those gaps. However, I want to be clear that we didn't include all of the service levels that DTSC isn't currently delivering because of a lack of resources. We focused on just those that were the highest priority and those that we have received feedback from you are the most important. Next slide, please. So when we say we conducted workload analyses, what we analyzed were 6 core program workload data sets and the data set from our Office of Environmental Information Management. Those reports were, we have 4 core programs under our Hazardous Waste Management Program. We analyzed Safer Consumer Products Program and the Site Mitigation and Restoration, or what we call the Cleanup Program. And I'm not going to go through all of the workload analyses results, but this slide indicates that the number of positions that were deficient to deliver some really crucial services, including increased inspections of transporters and distributors of metal-containing jewelry, which I know is super important. When we've been provided with resources in the past, we've been able to conduct inspections, and we found a really high rate of non-compliance. So additional support for the violation scoring procedure. This is just a cutting edge, and as Rizgar indicated, something that we're doing in the state of California that's brand new and is designed to hold facilities accountable and for us to use compliance history in a meaningful way in our permit decisions. And we identified the necessity to really fully resource that program in order to make it meet its legislative intent. And then finally, we want to make sure that the Safer Consumer Products Program is fully funded. When we were actually provided the statutory authority for that program, we weren't provided any positions or any resources to implement that program, and it's about 50% funded for what it really needs, or actually we weren't provided any resources, so we redirected resources, and it needs additional resources to fully be implemented and to make a meaningful difference on with its intent, and so that it can really work with manufacturers to compel the use of safer chemicals in our everyday consumer products. For our cleanup program, we simply are not resourced to conduct what we call discovery and investigation. And we know that there are approximately 200,000 contaminated sites located throughout the state of California. And in order to identify where these sites are located and to conduct an adequate amount of investigation to characterize the contamination, the department needs additional resources to perform that work. The workload analyses also identified some lack of resources in some areas that are not as highly visible as these core programs. We have an information management infrastructure that is aged and is at risk for security and cyber threats, and doesn't fully support the evolving technology and that we need to implement in order to make all of these programs more effective and efficient. Other areas that are not as highly visible are the need for resources to support our RCRA grant program, to make sure that we are providing businesses with and individual situations with the correct support for their management of hazardous waste. Next slide, please. So the workload analyses reports, they're very detailed. There's an executive summary and individual program reports available on DTSC's website at www.dtsc.ca.gov/workload, WORKLOAD -analysis, ANALYSES /. And we invite you to take a look at the detail and to continue conversations with us about the results and about the levels of service that you feel are necessary in order for DTSC to fully deliver on its mission. Next slide, please. So Meredith outlined the governor's proposal for governance and fee reform. And I just wanted to spend a minute of your time talking about what the path forward will be. So we know the proposed budget streamlines DTSC's fee structure. It creates a sustainable funding model for DTSC's current service levels, as well as future service levels that a board might determine are necessary. It creates that board for transparency and accountability. It also provides $300 million, you may not know this, but it provides $300 million in one-time funding for site cleanup in vulnerable communities. Also included in that $300 million is not included in that, but an additional $31.4 million is provided in the governor's proposed budget to meet the commitment to clean up to 3,200 residential properties around Exide. Next slide, please. So key dates that you may want to pay attention to so that you can provide your input into this process and feedback on the administration's proposed governance and fee reform include, in January, the budget was proposed by the governor. There are budget hearings that we had one this week with the Senate, and there will be an Assembly budget hearing next week. There will be policy committee meetings throughout early spring, and in May, changes will be made to the governor's budget based on the latest economic forecasts. In the summer, the budget will be passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. And so that's the target date for when these reforms will be finalized and decided upon. Again, you can find all of our summaries and detail. You can find summaries about the budget at www.ebudget, which is ebudget.ca.gov. And the department's code is 3960 to view all budget change proposals. And those are the requests for additional resources that the department submits to the legislature for consideration. Next slide, please. And so with this, I'd like to hand it over to Ana Mascareñas to go over the next steps and how to engage.
Thank you. This slide really is just to note the state legislature budget committee hearings, to share how the public can engage in the ongoing budget process. Francesca shared the website earlier of ebudget.ca.gov and how to access that information. And we will also be providing an update and hearing back, inviting your comments during our next quarterly public forum in May. We're going to take all of the information on the format, information of this meeting, and really think through it to make sure that we are hearing from you and can adapt and change these forums so they best meet your needs. So for next steps, if you would like to learn more about any of these presentations or a number of the important topics that you brought up today, I'll hand it back over to Ali in a moment so that folks who haven't had a chance to ask a question verbally yet can do so. I apologize that we ran a bit late on the presentations, but we want to make sure and get to the folks who haven't been able to ask a question yet in the audio queue. And we really do thank you for your time this evening. We want to be respectful of your time. If we can meet with you on any of these topics individually or in groups, please feel free to reach out to us. Our contact information is also on the slide and on the website where all of the materials are. I'll hand it back over to you, Ali.
Thank you, Anna. Next slide, please. So as Anna mentioned, in respect of everyone's time, we'll have to follow up on many of the questions that have been asked via text in the Q&A feature, but we'll make sure to answer those who have yet to have the opportunity to state their comment or ask a question of the panelists. Umberto Lugo, could you please unmute?
Yes, hi. Yeah, hi. So my name is Umberto Lugo, and I just, I wanted to give a comment because I grew up fence line to Pure Grow in Brawley specifically. I'm a member of the California Environmental Justice Coalition, and I grew up fence line to Pure Grow because of racist housing practices, federally funded projects, right, that situated families, low-income families next to hazardous waste facilities or potential hazardous waste facilities, such as Pure Grow. My concerns continue to be the same as many of my colleagues on the phone of how the word environmental justice within your agency is just tossed around, right? Like it's just a word, right? But at the same time, our communities don't get any protection from this agency that we, supposedly there to protect public health, which we know that's not your mission. And when you talk about resources and, you don't have the resources, but if the violations that happen in these communities, if the violation that you give polluters would match the crime, then maybe those resources would always be available, right? But I think, one thing that we've noticed with this agency throughout the years that it's entrenched in, so much, this agency racism so entrenched in this agency because it continues to put low-income communities, environmental justice communities in harm's way, right? You continue to do this. Even during the Pure Grow excavation, my parents offered their home, even during the COVID crisis, offered their home to do off-site air sampling during that procedure. Where I grew up and the stockpile, that was on Pure Grow and the distance to my parents' home is the same distance where that stockpile came from. So to me, it's still an issue of environmental racism because you never really, took into consideration all the input from our colleagues in the CEJC of looking at that site, at those sites adjacent where community members live and have been suffering with a history of illnesses, cancer for that matter. And so, I just wanted to make this comment and make sure that when you really talking about community engagement, the groups on the ground that are on this call today, the CEJC and all the colleagues on this call, are the groups that are going to guide the way these outcomes look. I hear that your budgets are kind of strapped at the moment, but I think this is because you have not looked into really enforcing the law for, I can't say, I think ever. You never enforced the law anywhere. We have so many examples across the country that communities are just left behind to fend for themselves, right? And in California, we have the Quinteco facility, we have the EXA, we have Pure Gold, we have Clean Harbors in Imperial County where I grew up. All that continues to be there, running on expired permits. So it continues to be a problem. And I just wanted to ask a question just for clarification from, I think Grant said that there's a process that prioritizes who gets the resources. And we would like to know who in your agency is the one that says, this community should get that, be prioritized to the money should go there first before this community, because I think that's a question that we really want to know. We want to really know how this continues to be a problem, right? And specifically for Pure Grow, we're not satisfied with that cleanup that happened. I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. There still needs to be some offsite sampling to the homes adjacent to Pure Grow, where my parents live at the moment, where they've always lived, where I grew up. And so, yeah, I think those are some of my comments. And I hope that this conversation today with our colleagues making these comments also allows you guys to think, we really need to have a more informed process guided by the CEJC, who are truly the ones that live in these communities next to these facilities. So thank you.
Alberto, thank you very much for your comments and for your questions. I'd like to start with Dr. Meredith Williams.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Lugo, for your comments. You really paint the picture of what it means to live next to these sites and what it means to what environmental justice really means, and remind us that it's not an abstract concept, that this is day in and day out. Your parents live there, you grew up there, and that's really important for all of us in the department to hear and to understand that we can't think of these things as abstractions. They are quite real, and we're taking a number of steps through our strategic plan and through just ongoing conversations about how do we make environmental justice real. And we've talked a little bit about the community vulnerability, cumulative impacts and community vulnerability work, but that is the intent of that truly is to make sure that these impacts are structured into how we make permit decisions, that it's not, that companies are asked to take additional precautions based on the overall burden of a community, and that they don't do that in a bubble, that they do that with very active community engagement. And that's the vision. And those are the kinds of things that really start to become more meaningful tools for us to address so many historical problems, longstanding problems and practices that have led to these environmental injustices. And so, it's my commitment to continue to remind our team, all of our staff, and as long as you keep reminding us, even without your reminding, we need to make sure that we're, again, saying this is not an abstract concept. It is real. It's people are experiencing this, and that gives us this sense of urgency to continue to push forward. Allie?
Thank you, Meredith. Next, I'd like to go to the phone line. 528. Would you please press *6 to unmute? Are you there? The caller with the last 3 digits of their number, 528.
Hear me? This is Laura Rosenberger Heider, Friends Against Fracking. Do you hear me?
I do hear you. Thank you.
Yes. Where is the fracking wastewater and mud and slightly radioactive going right now? Is it going to the dumps, or is it just spilling somewhere, or what?
Okay. Grant or Rizkar, is that a question you can address?
Thank you for the question. DTSC does not have oversight over the fracking operations. The department you want to reach out to is the Department of Geology and Mines. They're the group that you want to reach out to, or the local county that permitted the activity for that fracking activity. So I apologize. I'm not familiar with the specific site, and if you could provide me that information, I could reach out to that particular county and provide you the appropriate names for you and how they manage the waste.
I'm sorry, this is Meredith. If I could just ask, Rizgar, if you could explain that fossil fuel related, that those kinds of materials are actually not under our statutes in terms of what could you just explain that a bit?
Absolutely. So the statutes and regulation that manages where we operate under the Hazardous Waste Management Program under the Hazardous Control Act, that does not include the activities you just described in the fracking. Our colleague agency, we work tangentially with that agency they came up to us and asked the department to make the determination whether the fracking fluids that part of their operations, that the fracking operation, whether it's hazardous waste. There's a project that we worked on with them. The determination of that study concluded that the fracking material that comes out of the operation does not have hazardous waste constituents. It does have oil products, and that's managed under their regulations and that program. However, it did not contain hazardous waste, and hence it does not touch on the requirements within our regulations and our statutes.
Thank you, Rizgar, and thank you, Meredith. I'd like to make an announcement. You'll be receiving a poll about your Zoom experience tonight. We do look forward to your feedback. Oh, and there it is. Thank you, Marcia. Next slide, please. Patrice? Patrice, are you with us? Okay. Following tonight's meeting, you can make and maintain contact with DTSC by sending your questions, comments, and suggestions to our DTSC email box at dtscpublicmeeting@dtsc.ca.gov. Again, we're going to post a link in the chat box. For media questions or inquiries, please contact Elizabeth Scott in our DTSC Office of Communications at Elizabeth, ELIZABETH Scott, that's SCOTT, at dtsc.ca.gov. Again, that will be posted in the chat box. You can also find more information about our public meetings on DTSC's website. This link will be posted as well. It's dtsc.ca.gov/2021-quarterly-public-forums. Again, we'll post that in the chat box. Next slide, please. One more time to see if Patrice is with us.
I am. Thank you so much, Ali. Again, we'd like to hear from you regarding your feedback on tonight's meeting, as well as your suggestions for agenda topics for future public quarterly meetings. Again, we ask that you complete the survey that was posted. Thank you so much, Marcia, for posting that survey. For all of those that are appearing or have registered, you'll receive the survey via email. And if you're dialed in by phone, you will still be able to complete the survey. So we thank you very much for your feedback this evening and look forward to hearing from you so as we prepare for future meetings. Next slide, please. Thank you all so much. That brings us to the end of our evening. On behalf of our director, Dr. Meredith Williams, our chief deputy director, Francesca Negri, and our entire executive leadership team, we thank you all so very much for joining us in this collaborative space. As we close, we ask that you please stay safe and please be well. Good night, everyone, and have a good evening.